Hello again. We're going to continue on. This is the third session within our coursework for the Open Roads Quick Start for Terrain and Geometry. Again, this is the third session, and we're going to focus on the terrain in this session. We're going to go through and look at creating the terrain, and we are going to import that from legacy data. Then we're going to look at viewing that terrain and some of the properties that you can modify on how the terrain looks and how or what elements within that terrain are displayed. So I am here currently. If you're following along from the previous exercise, I'm in the northstreet.dgn with the three views displayed just as we set it up previously in the exercise beforehand. Now you may notice one thing here too. I'll deviate for just a brief second. We'll call this a freebie as far as the course goes. You'll notice that my background is white in my drawing file. By default it comes as black, and I'll show you quickly how I made that white. In the MicroStation, if you want to change the background from black to white, you simply go to Workspace. On the drop down menu, select Preferences, and on the Preferences menu you want to go to the View Options. Click on that on the left hand side, and under there's a toggle, a small checkbox that changes the black background to white. And in this case, I'm going to change back to a black background. So I'll uncheck that box and hit OK. And that changes my settings back to the default as delivered out of the box MicroStation with the black background. So again, we'll call that an extra tidbit of information within the class. So we're here in our drawing file. The drawing file is currently empty. And we want to focus now on the terrain model. In the scope of a project, we want to begin and first of all and think about the existing terrain. Whether that existing terrain, it could come from a multitude of different sources. We're going to look at taking an existing legacy file format from either En-ROADS, GeoPack, or MX and bringing that in to the new OpenRoads terrain. And there's a few things with the OpenRoads terrain that are different. Again, just like everything we've talked about beforehand, the terrain now in the new version is stored in the DGN, not an external file. So we're in our DGN file, and remember the DGN is the container for the data. So what we actually want to do, we want to create a new DGN file, and that's going to be, again, the container for our terrain. So I'm going to go up first of all and go to File, and we'll go to New. And again, we're going to create this new terrain model, or this terrain.dgn, or create a DGN in which we're going to store our terrain. We want to, again, pay attention to the seed file that we're using. We'll hit the Browse button. Previously, we selected a 2D DGN. You may have noticed that. You may not have noticed it. So our project file that we started and created in the first exercise is a 2D DGN. The DGN in which we're going to store the terrain should be a 3D DGN. So I'm going to select the seed 3D.dgn file, and I'll open that. That'll be the basis for my new file, and I'm going to name my new DGN. Now, if you follow the steps in the courseware, we're going to name this Existing Terrain, and we'll put units on it, Imperial.dgn. Existing Terrain dash Imperial.dgn, and we'll click the Save button. And this creates my new file, and this is a 3D file, and this is going to be the container for our terrain. So the point here in the object of this exercise, or the objective of this exercise, is to take existing terrain data, a DTM for example, or a TIN file, or an FIO file, and bring that forward into the new OpenRoads terrain. So we have a new DGN. We've created the container for the terrain. What we want to do now is move into the Civil tool set, or the OpenRoads tools. So I'll go over to the Task menu, go on to the Civil Tools tab, and open up the Terrain Model menu. And on the Terrain Model menu, you can see a multitude of different tools here. We want to select the first button on the top row, and that's the Create from File command. So we click the button to create the terrain from a file, and you'll notice that it puts you into a browse window, and we can browse out to our data set. So in this case, I'm going to browse to C, Bentley Training, Open Roads Quick Start for terrain and geometry, and here are the DTMs, the FIL, and the 10. That's going to be the basis for our terrain, our SS3, our open roads, or our course work terrain. You'll notice here, if I hit the drop-down menu for the different types of files, there are really quite a few different formats that we can use to build terrain from. And I just want to point this out because it's useful. In building existing terrain, you probably know that, again, that data for existing ground could come from a multitude of sources. It could be a DEM data or an existing, again, DTM in our case. It could be an XYZ text file. It could be a LiDAR, a .las file. So understanding that taking data from different sources and bringing it into existing terrain is important. So I just want to point out all those different file formats. In our case, in our course, we're going to select the DTM if you're using En-ROADS, the FIL if you're using MX, and the 10 if you're using Geopack. So select the appropriate surface file. I'm going to pick the DTM in this case. Select the Done button, and the Import Terrain Model dialog box opens up. Now on the dialog box, you'll notice there are several settings that we can look at. The things we're going to focus on are here within the feature definition. We're going to select the feature definition for our terrain. So we want to hit the down arrow, browse into the terrain display folder, and we want to select existing underbar boundary. Now the feature definition we're selecting really is kind of like the display parameters, more or less, for this terrain. And it can be changed later on, which you'll see. But we're basically setting the feature definition, defining how we want this terrain to display. And that includes what displays and what color level, line style, and weight it uses when it does display. On the import options, you've got a couple of options here, a couple of things you can choose from. You can import the terrain only, or you can import features only, or you can import both. So we'll import terrain only. We'll click on that and select it. And then you'll notice, although we're not going to cover it here, you can define a coordinate system for both the source data and the target data that we're moving into. For the exercise, we have everything set the way we want it to be set. We'll hit the import button. You'll notice that it's been grayed out here on the dialog until it tells us that the import's been completed, so we'll close the dialog box. Now in the MicroStation view, go ahead and fit the view, and you should be able to see the perimeter of the existing ground terrain displayed on your screen, such as I have displayed here. So at this point, we have taken a DTM, or any legacy data format for terrain, brought that in, created a new Open Roads terrain model, which you can see here, and that new terrain model is stored in the DGN file. You'll notice I can hover over that element and it tells me that it's a terrain model as well as the name of that actual terrain model. If I select the element, you'll notice the context menu here that's opened up. Okay, we're going to leave that as is. We're not going to worry about the display properties on this terrain at this point. Now, we're going to move back and into our project file. So we want to move back into our project file, which we called northstreet.dgn, and we're going to begin, we're going to attach this terrain to it and then move forward into the horizontal and vertical alignment sections. So what we want to do now, we've created our terrain model.dgn, or our DGN that contains our terrain, and I'm going to go and use the back arrow here and just move backwards into our original DGN file, which you can see here. So we're now back into our 2D DGN file, or our northstreet.dgn, which again was 2D. And now to access the existing ground terrain, we're going to reference that terrain DGN into our project file, just as we've done for many years in MicroStation. The civil tools now take advantage of referencing and allow us to interact with the data through those references. So what we want to do is simply reference our terrain.dgn file in. So within here, I'm going to go and open up the references, and you may or may not know I can get there a couple of ways. For this step, I'm going to click the button here, the references button, and that'll open up this dialog box that you see here. And this may deviate from the actual steps within the document. The document may direct you to File and References, which gets you actually to the same place. Here we are on the References dialog box. Now we want to go and hit the Tools button, hit the Attach command, and browse to the drawing file, which is the DGN that contains the terrain. And we want to select it, leave your attachment method set to interactive, click the Open button, and then we'll define the settings for this reference file. Select Coincident World in the middle of the dialog. As you go down the list, you have a series of toggles or buttons on the bottom. Turn off the Snap button, so that turning this off means that we won't be able to snap graphically to the reference file, the graphics in the reference file. So turn that off and go ahead now and click OK. And that's going to attach that terrain DGN to our file. We can close the references dialog box. And now in view 1, go ahead and hit the Fit View. And you'll be able to see the perimeter of the terrain in the DGN that's been referenced in. So we can fit that view, we can see that there.